Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. We're kicking off with a dream home, an entitled neighbor, and one very precise fence. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe at the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Give me the silent treatment for something out of my control. I'll ruin your birthday and make you question your manhood. My ex-boss was not a good person. He was controlling, egotistical, quick to anger, a womanizer, and hated depending on anyone, because that would mean he isn't in control. Boss ran a sports program which grew from 600 to 1,000 over my time working there, and had hired me to run the office and head the children's programs due to my experience working with larger programs in the same sport. Children make up about 80% of the program. Boss thought he was too good to mix with most of his clients or their families. He mixed mainly with the adults, particularly the attractive female ones, and never answered to phone or general emails. So pretty much everyone knew contact Pepper for anything. So one day an email gets sent directly to him addressed to Pepper and Boss. He didn't talk to me for the rest of the day. I tried to talk to him, email him, and get answers I needed for his business, and he was ignoring me. I thought I was going mad as he'd never done this before, and I'm fairly soft-spoken at work. Did he just not hear me while I was 5 feet away? The next day I asked him a question and he responded with, "Don't you know? I mean, you're so important that people address emails to you first." I was fuming. Like, you're seriously willing to jeopardize your business and clients because of a literal nothing treating me like crap? All because your ego can't handle it? No, not going to let that stand. One last thing, Boss is turning 50 soon. I was 26 or 27 at the time, and he had vaguely come on to me before. Gross, but it never went anywhere. I knew he was feeling insecure about getting older and was questioning, was he still a man, still strong and virile? Would he still have it for the ladies? I knew what had to be done. We're talking and I mentioned I know his birthday's coming up. How old would he be? 50? Wow, a milestone. My mom turned 50 a few years ago and it was quite an affair. Then I dropped this, the Devastator. You're only a few years younger than her. Huh, I guess that means you're old enough to be my father. He immediately clammed up. He didn't speak to me for the rest of the day and didn't come in for the next 2. Checkmate. This was almost 5 to 7 years ago. I found the best way to ask innocent questions and or act like you're observing out loud without malice when actually that's what you're doing. Between the ego, the tantrum, and the silent treatment, this man behaved less like a boss and more like a teenager whose crush didn't text back. The fact that an email greeting, a greeting, sent him into a full existential crisis tells you everything about how fragile his little power bubble was. And our second story. My boss was a walking scam. Firing my pregnant coworker was the last straw. When I was 17, I was working at a McDonald's, dreaming of literally any job that didn't smell like fryer grease. Every morning, this middle-aged woman came through for a large Diet Coke and a chat. One day, she told me her boss was desperate for workers at a shipping store. Not FedEx, but the kind that prints authorized shipper on the window and acts official. I took the bait. The boss, let's call him Jerry, gave me what might be the world's shortest interview. 5 minutes, no questions about my experience, goals, or even what position I was applying for. He just grinned, handed me some forms, and said, "Start Monday." At first, it wasn't bad. I packed boxes, scanned drop-offs, and kept the counter tidy. Jerry called me a hard worker and said I had potential, but within a month, that potential became free labor. He owned 2 stores 30 miles apart and told me I'd now be working both. "You've got a car, right?" he asked. I didn't. Then figure it out. So I was driving, or begging rides, 60 miles a day for $7.50 an hour. Jerry himself looked like a troll who'd raided a clearance rack at Men's Warehouse. Half-button shirts, gold chain and chest hair, spray-on tan, and the personality of a scam email. He bragged about cheating on his wife. He overcharged customers by 10% with a special calculator he'd installed on the registers. And if anyone complained, he'd say, "Then go to FedEx if you can afford it." Still, I worked hard, opened and closed stores, counted registers, ordered supplies, basically did everything a manager did, without the pay. When I finally asked for a raise, Jerry laughed. "You're already making more than you're worth, kid." That was strike one. Strike two came when I found out how he was skimming from a telecom company we handled returns for. Let's call it AT&T. Customers brought in routers, remotes, and boxes to return. We'd scan them, package them, and ship them back at no cost to the customer. AT&T paid Jerry well for the service, but Jerry noticed some returns didn't have scan tags, like random cables or Wi-Fi adapters, so he started pocketing them. He'd strip copper from cords, resell electronics on eBay, and even recycle batteries for tax credits. He'd bark, "Wrap that router for me, and don't forget to mark it personal shipment." We estimated he made a few grand a month just stealing from a multi-billion-dollar company. Then came strike three, and the revenge. My coworker, Kate, was one of the few people there, smart, funny, 8 months pregnant, and still working circles around the rest of us. Jerry and his infinite sleaze called a mandatory meeting one night after close. He started by saying, "Kate, I'm proud of you for working through your condition." Then, in front of everyone, he fired her. "Holiday season's coming up," he said, shrugging. "We need people who can move faster." 15 of us stood there in silence while Kate grabbed her bag and walked out crying. That night, Jerry assigned me to drive between stores for the upcoming corporate inspection, moving cash, deposits, supplies, even our only working fire extinguisher. I nodded, smiled, and quietly decided I'd had enough. I started with a call to AT&T's fraud department. "Hi," I said, "I think one of your contractors is stealing from you." I sent them photos of Jerry's stash and eBay listings. The rep on the other end practically vibrated with excitement. "We'll look into this immediately." Then I called the corporate offices for the shipping chain itself, told them everything: fake fees, price manipulation, stolen property, labor violations, the works. They thanked me and said they'd send someone out soon. I made sure soon meant the same day AT&T's investigators would arrive. Saturday came, I loaded my van with supplies, cash, around $4,000, and the fire extinguisher, exactly like Jerry told me. Then I drove them to the wrong store, the one he wasn't expecting to be inspected first. Half an hour later, my phone blew up. "Where the hell are you?" Jerry yelled. "Corporate's here." "Oh," I said sweetly. "I thought you said to go to the other store first." By the time I got there, the place was chaos. The AT&T rep had arrived right before Jerry, and he hadn't had time to hide his stolen goods. One coworker told me later there were shouting matches in his office, threats about his franchise contract, and an angry corporate rep demanding his shipping data. He lost his ability to handle AT&T returns permanently and was slapped with a corporate warning for non-compliance. The next day, Jerry called me. "You're working a double today," he barked. "Can't," I said. "Family emergency." "You're fired." "Cool," I said. "I quit last night." He sputtered something about running a Photoshop business on company time, referring to the free graphic design work I'd done for him. He's still in business somehow, but both stores now have 2-star Yelp ratings, and corporate forced him to stop using his own markup software. AT&T blacklisted him from ever handling their equipment again. Every once in a while, I'll check those Yelp reviews just to see how he's doing. The latest one says, "Owner screamed at me for asking about shipping prices." Yeah, that tracks. I still think about Kate sometimes. If Jerry's little empire ever collapses, I'll buy a round for the whole crew and toast to that greasy troll finally getting boxed up and shipped where he belongs. Return to sender. This story made me want to stand up and clap. You stood up for Kate when no one else could, and you did it in a way that hit Jerry where it hurt most, his wallet and his ego. He sounds like the final boss of sleazy franchise owners, gold chain, fake tan, and ethics straight from a dumpster fire. The fact that he called a meeting just to fire a pregnant woman for the holidays says everything. And our next story. My neighbor's jealous wife harassed me for my job until the police got involved. I'm a single woman in my early 30s, living in a quiet neighborhood full of young families and retirees. I own my house outright and work from home, writing adult fiction, and yes, I mean adult fiction. The kind that usually sits behind a digital age warning and has more steam than plot. It's my job, my income, and my business. I publish under a pen name for privacy, and except for a few friends, nobody around me knows what I write. Next door lives a couple I'll call Roger and Karen. Normal enough on the surface, polite waves, quick small talk, nothing deep. But a few months ago, Roger went from neighborly to flirting like a man who thinks subtlety's optional. I tried ignoring it, keeping conversation short, pretending to be glued to my phone when I saw him outside, but he kept escalating. On the bank holiday weekend, they had a huge barbecue with a bunch of friends. I took a bag of rubbish out and noticed Roger immediately lock onto me like a shark smelling blood. He waved, whispered something to his buddy, and both of them watched me walk back to my house like I was entertainment. That should have been my first warning. As I cut through my garden, Karen and one of her friends stepped out of their house at the same time, disgust mixed with judgment, and whispered behind their hands. I didn't stick around. Something was off. The next morning, I got the confirmation. There was a leaflet shoved through my letterbox, printed on cheap paper, full of warnings about lust leading to eternal damnation. I laughed at first. Religious spam happens. But then I get another and another. 4 days straight of hell awaits the wicked. By day 5, I'd had enough. I worked from home, so I sat up by the window and waited. Sure enough, Karen herself marched up my walkway, shoved another leaflet through, and strutted away like she was saving my soul. I opened the door and called her name. "Can you please stop putting these through my letterbox?" I kept it polite. Her polite mode was non-existent. "You need to rethink your life," she snapped. "What you write is disgusting." Ah, so someone talked. "And my husband," she continued, "was reading your filth at night like some kind of addict. You're encouraging sin in this neighborhood." I blinked. "Maybe take that up with him?" "You should be ashamed," she hissed. "You're going to burn." That was enough. "Stay away from me," I said, and closed the door. The next morning, the word SLUT was spray painted in red across my front door. That crossed the line. I installed cameras the same day. 3 days later, around dusk, I caught Karen on camera keying the side of my car. No hesitation, no shame. She looked straight at the house first like she was hoping I'd see it. Police came. I showed them the footage. They didn't need convincing. It was crystal clear. That evening, my neighbor across the street, a woman I've chatted with maybe twice, saw the police leaving and came over. She asked, "What happened?" I explained the situation briefly, the leaflets, the graffiti, the car. Her face twisted like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Oh, you shouldn't have called the police," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Karen's insecure. She's a lovely woman, really, a great mother. You should have talked to her." I just stared at her. She vandalized my house and my car. Yes, but involving the police, that's extreme. Right, because apparently I'm supposed to take harassment on the chin to protect the fragile ego of a woman who can't control her husband or her temper. The police didn't think it was extreme. They were already preparing the case for property damage and harassment, and Karen was being formally charged. A few nights later, Rogers slunk out to put their bins on the curb, and for the first time since I met him, he couldn't look at me, not even a glance, just shame and silence. I'll take that as an upgrade. As for Karen, she's been hiding inside ever since. No gardening, no smug looks, no religious pamphlet crusade, just closed curtains and a very quiet household. And the best part? My front camera caught her husband ripping down the remaining leaflets she'd left around the fence, muttering something that sounded like, "Are you trying to ruin us?" No comment, Roger, but she's doing a hell of a job all on her own. If she's keying your car and painting rude names on your door, she's not a lovely woman. Just because she doesn't like what you write doesn't give her the right to destroy your property. It appears that the behavior was escalating, so getting the police involved was necessary. And our last story. The builder who didn't know his own boundaries. Many years ago, after decades of saving and sacrificing, my husband and I finally reached a point in life where we could build the home we always dreamed of. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, just two people who worked hard, lived modestly, and planned carefully. So when our house was finally finished and we moved in, it felt surreal. The inside was perfect, but the outside still needed work. The yard was uneven and patchy, so early the next spring, we arranged to have it leveled and fully sodded. The sod crew came, followed the builder's survey stakes, laid everything out, and left. That evening, I went outside to water the fresh sod. The sun was setting, the yard smelled like new grass, and I was feeling pretty good. Until I noticed my neighbor's wife, Kate, pacing between our houses with the tape measure. At first, I thought something might be wrong, maybe a broken sprinkler or a loose gutter, so I called over asking if everything was okay. She didn't even look relieved to see me, just annoyed. "You sodded part of our yard," she snapped. I blinked. "No, we followed the stakes the builder left." "Well," she huffed, "then the builder screwed up. This isn't your property. You've taken part of our yard." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a conversation, it was an accusation. I tried to stay calm. The last thing I wanted was to move into a new home and immediately start a neighborhood war. So the next day, my husband, Dan, and I agreed to have our property resurveyed. If it turned out the stake line was wrong, we'd fix the sod. No problem. We wanted peace, not drama. But when the surveyor finished, we were the ones left speechless. The actual property line wasn't halfway between our houses like we'd assumed. It ran 1.5 feet from the side of their house, meaning their home, which they had built themselves through their construction business, was placed far too close to the boundary, a massive oversight. For a professional builder, embarrassing doesn't even begin to cover it. We didn't gloat, we didn't throw it in their faces, we genuinely wanted to keep things neighborly. So we approached Kate and her husband, Keith, with a very fair offer. Let's split the cost and labor of a good neighbor fence using one of the 4 community-approved designs, a clean, simple boundary marker, half and half. Keith agreed, verbally at least. But when Dan followed up about starting construction, Keith always had an excuse. Too busy, out of town, something came up. Months passed. Finally, Dan knocked again to ask about scheduling. That's when Keith finally dropped the polite act and snapped, "Stop bothering me about it." Dan came home furious. We'd gone out of our way to be fair. They had created this entire situation, demanded the new survey, accused us of stealing land, then stalled endlessly when presented with a reasonable solution. So Dan made a decision. He went out, bought every bit of material with our money, and built the fence himself. Originally, he'd planned to put the fence smack in the middle of the imaginary midline between the homes for aesthetics, but after Keith's attitude, nope, Dan built that fence exactly where the property line actually was, which meant the fence ended up 1.5 feet from their siding. The visual result? Their house suddenly looked like it was awkwardly jammed into a narrow alley, while ours looked perfectly proportioned. It was glorious. When Keith saw it, he stormed over, absolutely furious. "You had no right to put the fence there." Dan calmly handed him the survey documents, same ones Keith had insisted on in the first place, and replied, "You wanted the survey? You refused to work with me. This is the property line. This is our fence." And that was that. The cherry on top, Keith decided to build his own fence right next to ours out of spite. It was ugly, crooked, and, the best part, not one of the approved styles. The HOA stepped in and forced him to tear the whole thing down. The part that absolutely kills me is how confidently Kate strutted around with that tape measure like she was the neighborhood sheriff. She acted like you personally stole slices of her backyard, only to find out her own husband basically parked their house like a teenager parallel parking for the first time. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.